There was a moment, not loud, not dramatic, not something anyone would stop to notice. Just a quiet moment where everything felt possible. And in that moment, he chose to trust. Not because he had proof, not because he had certainty, but because it felt right. Because sometimes feeling right is easier than being right. And in another version of that exact same moment, nothing changed. Same place, same conversation, same opportunity. But something inside him didn't move at the same speed. One version stepped forward immediately, driven by excitement, by ambition, by the need to move fast. Because in his mind, speed meant success. The other version paused, not to reject the opportunity, but to understand it. Because he knew what starts fast often hides what hasn't been seen yet. One version laughed easily, trusting the connection, believing the energy was real, mistaking comfort for certainty. The other version observed quietly, watching details, listening beyond words. Because he understood, people don't reveal themselves in what they say, but in what repeats. One version signed the agreement, confident, certain, committed, believing loyalty would protect everything. The other version stepped back, just enough to see what wasn't obvious. Because trust without structure is not strength, it's exposure. One version ignored the first feeling of doubt, calling it fear, calling it overthinking, convincing himself this is just part of growth. The other version paid attention to that feeling, not as weakness, but as information, because instinct doesn't stop you, it warns you. One version noticed small cracks, tiny inconsistencies, moments that didn't fully make sense, but he chose to keep going, because stopping now felt harder than continuing. The other version leaned closer to those cracks, studied them, not to destroy the opportunity, but to understand it completely. One version stayed inside the story, but slowly began to feel out of place, like something invisible was shifting. The other version stepped outside the story, and from a distance, everything became clearer. Because distance removes illusion. One version received signals, subtle changes, unspoken tension, but chose not to believe them, because belief had already been invested. The other version saw those same signals and didn't ignore them, because truth doesn't become clearer with time, it becomes louder. One version kept moving forward, even as doubt followed him, turning progress into pressure, turning success into silent anxiety. The other version slowed down, letting clarity catch up, because clarity never disappears. It's only delayed by distraction. One version eventually faced the truth, but by then, the cost had already begun. The other version walked away early, before damage, before conflict, before regret. One version saw the truth in numbers, cold, precise, unavoidable. And in that moment, everything collapsed. The other version never reached that moment, because he questioned before committing. One version walked into confrontation, with anger, with disbelief, with frustration, demanding answers he already understood. The other version never needed confrontation, because he listened before things became loud. One version stood in a room full of people, but felt completely alone, because broken trust doesn't just leave, it takes something with it. The other version sat alone, but felt completely in control, because nothing inside him had been taken. One version deleted a name, slowly, hesitantly, as if removing it could erase the impact. The other version never had to delete anything, because he never ignored what mattered. One version replayed every moment, every word, every decision, every sign, trying to find the exact point where everything went wrong. The other version remembered those same moments as confirmation, not regret. One version searched for clarity after the damage. The other found clarity before the decision. One learned through loss. The other learned through awareness. One carried hesitation into the future. Every decision felt heavier. The other carried clarity. Every decision felt grounded. One became reactive, responding to everything, trusting nothing. The other remained intentional, choosing carefully, trusting wisely. One watched things fall apart, feeling powerless. The other built slowly, feeling in control. One carried stress into silence. Even quiet moments felt loud. The other found peace in stillness, because nothing needed to be avoided. One felt people drifting away. Trust around him slowly fading. The other felt respect growing, without needing to chase it. One became distant. Not from others, but from himself. The other became more connected, because he stayed aligned with his decisions. One questioned everything, every message, every intention. The other understood enough not to question everything. One looked back and saw warning signs he ignored. The other looked back and saw the moment he chose differently. One faced new opportunities, but couldn't trust them fully. The other created new opportunities, with structure, with awareness. One saw a reflection shaped by regret. The other saw a reflection shaped by growth. One sat surrounded by what used to be, dreams that didn't survive reality. The other stood surrounded by progress, built slowly, built intentionally. One walked through crowds, but felt completely alone. The other walked among people, grounded, connected. One faced consequences that didn't disappear. The other saw results that strengthened over time. One stared at the world, unsure what to believe anymore. The other looked ahead, clear on what matters. One searched for connection, but struggled to trust again. The other built connections without losing awareness. One finally understood, but only after everything changed. The other understood early and changed everything because of it. One saw two versions of his past and wished he chose differently. The other saw two possibilities and chose the one that protected him. One walked through darkness, searching for clarity too late. The other walked toward light because he followed clarity early. One carried the weight of every ignored instinct. The other trusted the instinct that guided him away. One reached realization through regret. The other reached realization through awareness. One stood at the edge, finally seeing the full picture. The other stood with clarity, without needing to lose everything first. One saw lessons written in pain. The other saw lessons applied in time. One let go of blind trust after it cost him deeply. The other never held blind trust, only balanced judgment. One carried the memory as a permanent reminder. The other carried the lesson as quiet strength. One moved forward, slower, heavier. The other moved forward, steady, controlled. One found peace after accepting what he couldn't change. The other lived in peace because he chose differently from the start. One closed the chapter with understanding built from loss. The other closed the chapter with clarity built from awareness. One rebuilt himself piece by piece. The other built himself with intention from the beginning. One learned to trust again, but never the same way. The other trusted wisely, without ever losing himself. One became a lesson for who he used to be, and the other became the result of who he chose to become.